We have been apart for nearly a year, but I still daydream about the person I thought he was. I know it's a false version he created to manipulate me, but I can't seem to shake it. Why do I still feel drawn to someone who was so abusive?
That is probably the question one of the top couple questions that I get most often, honestly. And first of all, it's so important to not blame yourself for wanting, for having that feeling, because there's a couple reasons for this. I'm sure everybody's heard that you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. First impressions are so powerful. It's how our minds kind of do a snapshot of what we think that person is all the time. And, think about it, even if you were to go to, the store and you would have a cashier and you'd check out and that person was like super wonderful and amazing. You would leave that experience thinking, wow, that person is just, as a general rule, must be very nice, right? Because that's the first impression. It's super powerful. Again, it's the snapshot that our mind makes about who we believe that person to be. And narcissists know this. This is why they use love bombing. This is why they're so charming. This is why they really are, they can be very witty. And, they know that charm makes people lower their boundaries and it makes us attached to them, right? So it's powerful. It's not just I can't get my emotions to detach from this person. It was actually like a psychological attachment that was created when you first saw this first impression of this person. And so narcissists know this and they do it intentionally. So it's nothing to blame yourself about. It is a psychological reaction that happens when we meet somebody and we think that they're amazing in the beginning. And so the second reason, and this is something I think that a lot of people don't understand or recognize that happens, and it's a trauma bond is often created with a narcissist. And a trauma bond doesn't mean that you necessarily had to experience a traumatic event together. It's not like, I have a trauma bond because I was in a plane crash with someone. It's not that case with the narcissist at all. A trauma bond is basically when the same person who hurts you is also the person who heals you. And so a lot of times it's the abuse, the abuse, the abuse by the narcissist. And then when you're about to leave, or you're about to call the police, or you're about to set something into play that the narcissist doesn't want to happen, the narcissist will then come in and be the one who's like, oh my gosh, I love you. I'm so sorry. You're right. I should never, I can't be sorry enough. I'm going to make this better. So it's that cycle. And our brain gets addicted to that. It's actually the same kind of psychological, biological thing that happens with an addiction to anything, what, substance or anything, food, whatever. It's the same thing. So that trauma bond is really chemically, physiologically happening, which is one of the reasons that it's so hard to stop feeling drawn to the person who hurt you, because the same person who hurt you is also the one who healed you.
Yeah. Have you also heard something about, familiarity that we feel like that could be also the reason why we feel drawn to someone who was so abusive if those patterns are like very familiar to us.
Yes, exactly. Because our brain's number one job is to keep us alive. And when our brain has something that's familiar, it it feels very comfortable there. So a lot of people will say, why do I keep, not necessarily just one person, but why do I keep falling into these same narcissistic type abuses or abusive situations or relationships? It's because our brain recognizes these behaviors as familiar. And to our brain, familiar equals safe, when actually familiar doesn't have to equal safety at all. So when we see something in someone, the example I always use is, imagine you're from the United States, you're traveling in Europe, and you're super unfamiliar with what's around you, and then you meet somebody and they say, "Oh, we're from the United States," and you instantly are like, "Oh, good. That's great." Right? And then if they say, "Where are you from?" and you say, "Oh, I'm from New York," and they say, "Oh my gosh, I'm from New York too." Then more familiarity, right? "Oh, have you ever been to, whatever?" "Yeah, I've been there a bunch of times. I love it." "No, do you know this guy?" The more familiar something feels to us, the more safe our brain makes us believe it is. And so when we are getting out of something that's familiar, that's very scary for our brain. So our brain really wants us to stay with what's familiar. And when we hear the words comfort zone, we think, oh, that's where I'm comfortable. That is not where we're comfortable. That's where our brain feels familiar. And so when our brain recognizes these similar patterns in other people, doesn't always send off red flag alerts. It sends off familiarity alerts. And that lets us drop our guard because we crave it, because it does feel safe.
Also in our community, we were like, I took this one thought from there, and like I wanted to ask your thoughts about it. Could also like if we think about the narcissistic relationship and what happens in that relationship, often, they tore down your self-esteem and make you feel like you are not good enough. Could this also, this belief of you're not good enough, create this weird pull to seek their approval? So almost like you're trying to prove your own worth by winning them back. So this could be also part of the reason why someone still feels drawn to someone who was so abusive. Can you, like, yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this.
Yes, and that's another really powerful pull, right? Is the feeling of acceptance. And whether, especially if it is the situation where the narcissist is a parent or a caregiver or somebody in your family, we are wired to want that acceptance from people who are important to us. And we will always try to go back if left to our own devices, if we're not intentionally redirecting ourselves. Our like knee-jerk reaction is to always, well, maybe this time I'll get their approval. Maybe this time I'll get their acceptance. Maybe this time I'll feel good enough, because we're always looking for that connection. We're social beings. We're always looking for that connection with somebody else. And different relationships have different pull. As I said, with our parents, we're wired biologically to want the acceptance and approval of our parents. It ultimately means survival to have our parents attached to us as we attach to them, as infants or whatever. And so we're wired to want that acceptance. And, when the narcissist makes us think that if you just try harder, then I'll give you the acceptance, right? It's kind of like the intermittent rewards. They've done studies, and with mice or whatever kind of animal that will go and push a button to get a pellet of food. When the pellet of food doesn't always come out, the mice don't give up. They keep hitting it because intermittently they're going to get a reward. And our brain is addicted to that reward. So our brain will keep, think of any addiction, gambling, substances, whatever. Our brain is like, I know the reward is out there. I know I can get it. And so we keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. And the narcissist uses this to their advantage. They weaponize it because they want us. They know exactly what we want. They know we want this approval and acceptance and love and respect. And so they will give us a little bit. And this is part of what causes the trauma bond. The same person who hurts you is also who heals you. And they give you a little bit, knowing that they're going to pull it back because you're just going to keep coming after it again and again.
Great explanation. Also, in this question, there was like, I want to, say it out loud again. So I know it's a false version he created to manipulate me, but I can't seem to shake it. And why do I still feel drawn to them who was so abusive to me? So this is like what are your thoughts on this? How someone can fully know that the version of the person they miss wasn't real, that it was just manipulation, and yet they still feel drawn to them? So how is it possible for these two things to exist at the same time? Your thoughts on this?
Yes, it is so confusing because rationally that this person isn't who they portrayed themselves to be. But emotionally, we still think that person exists. We still wish that we can go back to the daydream that we had when we first met them. Again, different relationships can look a little bit differently, whether it's a dating relationship or a parent or a friend or whatever. But we still emotionally wish that person existed. And so it is so powerful because think about most of our decisions are made on emotion. And emotion is really powerful. It's kind of like rationally, say you have a fear of flying. Rationally, you know that all of the research and all of the data supports that air travel is the safest form of travel. But emotionally, when you get in that plane, you can rationally know all of the things all day long that it's the safest form of travel. Once you're in that plane, though, emotionally, you can still be a wreck because your emotions are really way more powerful oftentimes than our rational thought.